Hello, this is a supplementary recording for the Crime in the Media module to explain what you need to do for the group presentation assignment that is taking place Friday in 5 days' time from now. The group activity was envisioned originally for about 3 or 4 people per group. I've got a feeling that some of the groups might be a little bit larger than that, and some of you are also talking about doing it as a solo activity. It is meant to be a group activity, but obviously sometimes groups don't always work out terribly well. If we average for the group activities, that whilst the guideline in the handbook says 15 minutes, if we average about 5 minutes per person in the group, so if it were a group of 3 people, that would indeed take you to 15 minutes. If you've got a larger group, then again, 5 minutes per person, so 20 minutes for 4 people, 25 minutes for 5 people, etc. If you're doing this as a solo activity, aim for around about 10 minutes, roughly, because you will need to cover all of the issues that a group of people will be covering, and that's going to be difficult to do in just 5 minutes. So aim around about 10 to 15 minutes if you're doing it by yourself, so that you can cover all of the same issues that would be covered in a group presentation. Now, entirely up to you if you want to do it one person after another, so that in your group one person stands up, does 5 minutes, sits down, the next person stands up, does their 5 minutes. You can do it that way, or you can take more frequent turns, so somebody does 2 minutes, somebody else does 2 minutes, somebody else does 2 minutes, and then you go back to the first person again and they continue it that way. Wholly up to you how you want to do that. We will video it in class, and that will be shown to the second marker, and feedback will come from that in due course. Now, in terms of how you need to break down your presentation, if you choose one of the 4 crimes listed in the handbook, so your choices are murder, rape, online crime, or fraud. Now, some of those have varying aspects. So murder can include, for example, manslaughter as a subdivision of murder. There are a number of sexual offences that can be included under the rape category. There's a lot of different types of online crime. So decide which type you want to look at as a group, so you're all looking at the same type. And the first person to stand up needs to offer a legal definition of that crime, which you can garner from the Home Office website, or you might choose to look in a book of law and get the definition from that. Now, some of these crimes, particularly things like rape, have changed their definition over the course of the years. What I need to know is the current definition, not the definition from 50, 60, 70 years ago, but the current one. So offer that definition, then move on to reflecting on the key thrust of the presentation, which is the idea that most members of the general public do not necessarily understand the legal definition of crime. A barrister would, a judge would, a police officer would, because they have the expertise and the experience and the training. The average Joe public does not necessarily understand the law the way legal professionals do. So frequently, as we've said many times in class, most people's average understanding of the law and of crime comes from watching the television or reading the newspapers. So their understanding of crime will be shaped more by a newspaper or by a work of fiction on the television or at the cinema than by a law book or by the Home Office website. So in thinking about how people understand that crime, that takes place at a number of levels. So people's view of a crime, simply in terms of what it is, may differ from the legal definition. So, for example, particularly when it comes to sexual offences, people's understanding of what constitutes rape, what constitutes sexual assault, is often quite confused, and the way the law defines these things changes more rapidly than the average person's understanding of it. And so people can engage in activities that might be classed as sexual assault, themselves not realising that the law has changed and that what they're doing now might have been legal 30, 40 years ago, but is not necessarily legal anymore. They may not have sort of kept up to speed on changes in law and changes in definition. So partly it's looking at whether the average understanding of a person concurs with the law. That's one factor to look at. But you can also look at, and I would encourage you to do so, issues of victimology. So who do people imagine, what kind of people does the average member of the public imagine are most likely to fall victim to this sort of crime? Who do they think is most likely to be murdered? Who do they think is most likely to be sexually assaulted? Who do they think is most likely to be defrauded, etc.? And that may well be based upon what they see in the television, what they see in the cinema, what they read in the newspapers. So, as an example, almost all sex crime presented in popular media involves young women as the victims and men who are either young men or sometimes middle-aged men as the perpetrators. There are male victims of sex crimes, there are elderly victims of sex crimes, there are middle-aged victims of sex crimes, and the perpetrators can be sometimes very young, sometimes they can be middle-aged or occasionally even elderly perpetrators of sex crimes. Sometimes they can be disturbingly young, teenagers committing sex crimes. So all sorts of people commit crimes, but they don't necessarily get featured in television programs or featured very much in newspapers. So what you need to do is look at the common media representation of the victim, the common media representation of the perpetrator, and then make a comparison to actual statistics of reported crimes, who in practice, what types of people, age, gender, race, social class, etc., what kinds of people most commonly become victim of that type of crime, what kinds of people most commonly are the perpetrators of that type of crime. And if you find a disparity between the statistics and the popular media representation, that's where you can start to bring in criminological theory to explain why the media is presenting an image of crime that does not marry up to the statistical reality of crime, either as regards the victim or as regards the perpetrator, or a little bit of both. So explore those two issues, victimology and perpetrator. Also look at the issue of frequency. Now, it may well be that, as we've said in class, some types of crime are quite popular to appear on television and in the newspapers. They're considered exciting, they're considered salacious. The media dwell on them and may give the public the impression that those types of crime are way more common than actually they are. So in looking at statistics of frequency, try to find some statistics on how often people get defrauded, how often they get cyber-stalked, how often people get murdered. Most people only get murdered once, obviously, but how frequent murders take place in Britain compared to the popular perception of how common they are based on the frequency with which this type of crime gets featured on television shows and in newspaper reports. So it's looking at both the victim, the perpetrator, and the frequency of the crime, as well as understandings of the nature of the crime. So you've got those four factors to take into account. In terms of how you divide that between your group, one person could look at the facts, somebody else could look at the media perceptions, somebody else could weigh up the theories that explain them. Or you might want to get one person, let's say one person dealing with the victim, one person dealing with the perpetrator, one person dealing with the frequency issues, or however you want to do it. That's entirely up to you. Where you will score a higher grade is through inclusion of criminological theory that explains the nature of how the media operates and why they represent certain crimes in the way that they do. So particularly the more special, so not so much the generic theories like hypodermic theory and so on, but the theories that apply more particularly to certain types of crime and why those types of crime are represented in the way that they are. So you could look at feminist theories around the representation of rape, for example. You could look at Marxist theories around the representation of fraud and other kinds of property crime. So explore those ideas and examine them, take on board the theory. If you include a slide at the end, if you've got some kind of PowerPoint, or if you don't, a set of notes that you can upload onto Canvas, a page of the set of notes should include a reference list. yeah, I don't expect you to read the reference list out, just the fact that it exists is sufficient. What I'd like you to remember to do, because people keep forgetting to do this, is not only to do the exercise in class, but also to upload something onto Canvas before the deadline, please. People keep missing the deadline, and it's causing a lot of problems with the grading system. So what you upload, it could be a PowerPoint, it could be the set of notes you want to read. As it's a shared group activity, if you've each got your own set of notes, it will make life much easier if you just upload your own set of notes rather than a sort of mass upload. If you all upload exactly the same thing as each other, it will set the plagiarism computer program off. Whereas if you each upload your own individual set of notes, that won't occur. So upload that within the deadline, please, and I will append feedback to it once the second marker has had a chance to listen to your presentations. We will strive to give you individual grades rather than a standardized group grade, because it can be annoying if one person has done really well and somebody else has hardly bothered, and you all end up with the same grade as each other. That does lead to conflict within the class, and we're trying to avoid that. So we will strive to give you individualized grades, which will be reflected partly by the individual section that you've done, and also how well you gel with each other in terms of presentations. So things like speaking clearly, speaking in a slow, measured fashion, so that we can follow what's being said and you're not getting stressed and panicking and gabbling. Presenting clear, accurate information, showing that you have a good understanding of theory. That's particularly important, to have theory in there. Some people keep having this tendency to present facts and virtually no theory whatsoever, and that's not going to get you a good grade. It's the theory and your grasp of criminological theory, a bit of sociology, a bit of psychology, a bit of criminology. Get that in there. That's what's going to get you the better grade. So hopefully that covers everything you need to know. That's certainly what I think you need to know anyway. If you have any questions, do email them to me ahead of the class, and I will endeavour to answer you or put the answers up onto Canvas, because other people may have the same questions, of course, so that you've got a clear idea of what you need to be doing for Friday. Okay. Thank you.